Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning. My name is Joe Sellepack. I'm your host today for Encounter. Anniversaries are important to mark the occasion. Just try to forget an anniversary at one point. If you're a man, it's particularly difficult because your wife is probably not going to appreciate it very much. Forget her birthday and you're in the doghouse. Anniversaries are important. We mark them by occasions. I still remember when my dad was at Ford Motor Company. He celebrated his 30th anniversary working for Ford, and he got a watch, and he was very proud of that watch. Not so much the watch itself, but what that watch represented. 30 years of perseverance, of determination and hard work. And so my brother now has that watch, and it's an important thing for him to remember as well. But 30 years is how long he lasted at Ford. He ended up retiring and then gave up on engineering almost altogether. However, there are some people around who view their work as a calling. Today we're going to be celebrating the 50th anniversary of one person who saw media as being a calling in his life, and this person is Jeff Kellam. We have a clip today that we're going to play for you from Celebration Rock, which was his first radio show that he started 50 years ago. So here's a clip from 1987.
Anger and determination married to the beat of Genesis on Celebration Rock for a Sunday. He looks around and diagnoses the problem. Too many people making too many problems, and not much love to go around. Then comes an honest admission. This is the world we live in. Then a prescription for enabling healing to take place. These are the hands we're given. Use them, and let's start trying to make it a place worth living in. Again, he sees there's not much love to go around, but he's determined that his generation will keep its promises to put things right. To what land does the song refer, do you suppose? And where is there confusion? Just name a direction. South Africa, Northern Ireland, Central America, the Middle East. Confusion? Would that mean war, conflict, political rivalry, differences of perception, values in conflict, ideologies at odds? Perhaps it's all summed up in the line that says there is not much love to go round. The singer could be a modern prophet announcing the good news that follows judgment. Like Jeremiah or Amos or the other biblical prophets, society's ills are outlined and punishment is threatened. But hope is preached too. These are the hands we're given. These are the names we're given. Stand up and let's start showing where our lives are going to. There is a determination to survive here. There is a courageous attitude of faith in action here. Thy kingdom come to this land of confusion, Lord. Thy will be done, we pray with Jesus. And with St. Francis, we pray, Lord, make us instruments of your peace. As we face daily headlines and almost weekly crises, use our hands, our gifts, our faith to bring peace and justice to lands of confusion.
I just wanted to keep going because Genesis was one of my favorite groups. 1987, I was in high school, or I was actually in college at that time, and we listened to that album before every home basketball game.
Is that right?
Or away basketball game.
Yeah.
We would put it into our Invisible Touch. I can't even remember. One of the ones that used to get us all pumped up was that one about, I saw what you did. I saw it with my own two eyes.
Right. It's so suspicious.
You know, suspicious sounding.
Oh, yeah.
We're sitting there going, yeah, we're going to get those guys.
That's great.
It's a great album. So tell us a little bit about your ministry and about Celebration Rock. How did it start?
Well, it started on an AM rock station in Richmond where the Presbyterians had a time slot at 8 o'clock Sunday night. And this rock station was playing rock and roll, and we had maybe, I don't know, the estimate was like 6,000, 7,000 teenagers and young adults listening until 8 o'clock when the Presbyterian radio hour came on. This was a throwback show that had panel discussions, lectures, choir music, and of course the youth weren't interested in that.
No.
About this, now this is 1968, where this, obviously it's 50 years ago. And someone said, the Lutherans nationally have a program called Silhouette with Brother John. Mm-hmm. Brother John had these pipes that you wouldn't believe. And he played secular rock music. And he said, what if we took the Presbyterian radio hour and made it into something else with rock music? And maybe kids would listen. So they knew I had some background in college radio, and I was on the seminary radio station at that time in Richmond, which was playing classical music. It was a precursor to NPR. And so they said, Jeff, would you be interested in doing a pilot? Well, I didn't know anything about rock music. Right. I grew up with my parents' big band records, and I knew a little bit of pop music. You couldn't escape it from dances and college things. And so I went up to Woolco, predecessor to Walmart, and I bought this album, the Motown Sound 16 Original Hit 16, 1967, because I thought, well, I need some variety here to do this
You got to figure out what you're going to talk about.
Yeah, well, I had no idea, so I thought I'll play a few songs and I'll talk about the church. Well, the pilot was not very good, but it was so different, they thought it was good.
Right.
So they said, well, let's air this one Sunday. And they chose I guess it was the second Sunday of February, 1968. And they said, we'll go for a month and see what kind of response we get. Well, that little experiment ran 22 years. And in that time, it grew from that rock station in Richmond, and we got a Gabriel Award from the Catholics nationally, and that got some attention. And from then it went into syndication, which we did all by ourselves. I was a one-man shop.
Yeah.
I wrote the scripts, I listened to the music, I did the editing of the show, I put them in boxes and wrote the labels and sent them off, and the Presbytery paid the bills, so I never had to ask for money from the listeners.
Now they're showing, they had just shown a clip of a newspaper article, and that article was on the 50th anniversary of your ordination as a media minister. Right?
Yes, yes. The program started in my middle year in seminary. And then we went for a year, and it was time to look for work. I was graduating from seminary, and they said, we wish we could hire you full-time to do this, to continue this, because we've got a good thing going here. And I said, well, that would be great with me, too.
Right.
And so they couldn't find full-time work, but they found 2/3 time work. And then they found a youth ministry that was opening up in an old house in a suburb of Richmond, and said you could work 1/3 time there and 2/3 time in media. So that program was not the only one I did. That was the center point. That was the beginning, and that's why I've marked 50 years. But I also did probably 10 or 12 other radio shows and some TV work in Richmond during that time that I was there.
So the picture that we have up right now has you with a group of kids.
Yes.
So what did you do with this with kids?
Well, locally, once I had established this Sunday night program and got some good response, someone would invite me to come and talk to their church youth group about rock music. Mm-hmm. Now I'm starting to listen to the lyrics. I'm starting to understand the storytelling. Mm-hmm. I was not a record burner, which is what the church did most of the time with rock music.
Exactly.
I was listening for the positive songs, or the songs that had an honest commentary on the world around us.
Right.
Keep in mind.
Kind of like in the song that we just heard.
Yes, Land of Confusion.
Land of Confusion.
And if you go back to the beginning of the show, it was 1968. What a year.
Right.
You know, you had the assassination of 2 national leaders. You had race relations at the fore. You had the war in Vietnam that people were debating. You had political division.
Right.
And so the music reflected that. Race riots.
Yeah.
And the music spoke to that.
Right.
So then you get into the 70s and you've got Jesus rock.
Right.
It's like you've moved from the upheaval of the 60s into the 70s. Now we're talking about Jesus and Superstar and Put Your Hand in the Hand of the Man from Galilee.
Right.
So now youth groups are saying, we can have Jeff Kellam come and talk to our kids about this music.
Right.
And help them listen to the lyrics. There was one church, you know, I could tell stories all day here.
Well,
but
please go ahead.
There was one church that wanted to talk about sex education.
Right.
But the vestry of this Episcopal church said, we're not talking about sex with our kids here at this church.
Right.
So
as if they don't talk, as if the Bible doesn't talk about sex.
That's right.
Or our theology doesn't have anything to say about sex either.
So they said, Jeff, could you come in and do a weekend on rock music for us? And so in talking with the rector, I found out about this issue about sex education. I said, well, let's do sex and rock and roll.
Right.
So we played songs, and some of them were kind of coarse and negative, but we also played some beautiful songs about love and so on. And you know, Paul Stuckey's wedding song,
right,
which everybody used at their weddings, and probably
at that time, yeah.
Yeah. So it was easy to put together 3 units: Friday night, Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon. So we were doing sex education, but we were playing. It was under the guise of the rock music thing. Well, then once the program got syndicated, then I was starting to go. I went to Kansas City. I went to Montreat, North Carolina. I went to Erie, Pennsylvania. And all these groups and conferences, a lot of conferences in North Carolina at various denominations, talking about the power of music to communicate, not the gospel. This was long before contemporary Christian rock. There wasn't any at that time. But in the early 70s and into the 80s, I was playing the music that they listened to on the radio and what they were listening to in their bedrooms, but helping them to listen to the lyrics.
My guest today is Jeff Kellam, and we're celebrating his 50th anniversary of media ministry.
Yeah.
And this is a huge milestone. So, you know, you've touched on this a little bit, but how did music change from when you started your ministry to maybe, you know, to that 1987 clip that we just listened to? Like, what were some of the changes that you saw?
Well, we've talked about the late 60s and the turbulent times and how the music reflected that. Then you get into the Jesus movement of the early 70s, and then comes disco.
Right, right.
And, you know, from Saturday Night Fever and John Travolta and the Bee Gees, disco took over. Everything was disco, discotheque here and there. And I thought, well, the power of the lyric was important to that music.
Right.
What was important was the beat and the sense of community. Well, someone introduced me to a dance therapist. And so we did a program using disco, but talked about the power of dance and what that all meant. And she was wonderful, and just she said, imagine the discotheque with the lights and the wave of dancers going up and down, the rhythm, and with the power of community. Well, that made for a great show.
It's kind of like your first church yoga thing, right? So let's.
In what way is it like that?
Well, I'm thinking about, you know, the difference between the way that you approached rock and roll and the way that I grew up with. I attended a fundamentalist Baptist school where they instead of embracing rock and roll and then they became very, very restrictive. And as a matter of fact, we did a whole Bible curriculum on rock and roll, in which at the end they had promised to give our records back to us. Instead, they couldn't, in good conscience, give us our records back.
Oh my!
And I had a friend whose father had given him a White Album by the Beatles, and of course, you know, they had that whole backward masking thing that they did with that album, and at the end, they wouldn't give him his album back, and he's saying, but it's the only album I have of my dad. My dad died, and then instead they burned it, and he was devastated, and I can still remember the, you know, and if he's actually in the church anymore, it's a miracle.
In spite of that,
It's in spite of that. So the you know, yoga comes up, and so there was a whole movement against yoga in the church too. So they didn't want to see any because what are you meditating in there, and the whole reactive kind of thing to it. So instead of embracing the potential that or the hunger or the search that people are on when they're looking through these things, we react to it, and we make it an enemy.
One of the when I retired from active ministry 10 years ago, I started a blog about Celebration Rock. I just wanted to kind of bring my memories together, and not just to look back, but I think the church has not used media in a creative, wonderful way until now, because it's so accessible. You know, you can buy a video projector for your church for a few $100s. You can create a video using your phone. But back in the day, it took a lot of budget in order to do this. So when I was thinking about my blog, I didn't want to just look back, but to challenge church folks to use media in a creative expression, to break out of the box a little bit, not just show our worship service on cable TV, but how can we tell stories and so on. So anyway, the backmasking thing on my blog, which is www.celebrationrock.wordpress.com, the backmasking thing that I wrote about was probably one of the most accessed of the blog things. People go searching for backmasking. And you know, what I thought about it was that it was silly. There were some people like the Beatles